Tonight we explore a different path for Draco Malfoy. What if Draco died an old man, filled with regret for the choices he made during the war, only to wake up again as a child with every memory still intact? What if he remembered Hogwarts, Voldemort, the Death Eaters, and the future waiting for them all? In this version of the story, Draco is given the one thing he never thought he deserved: a second chance. But with all his knowledge, all his magic, and all his guilt returned to him, the question becomes whether he can truly change his fate, or if the Malfoy name will drag him back into darkness. Draco Malfoy died on a Tuesday. Not violently, not dramatically, not in the blaze of glory or the darkness of defeat that the wizarding world might have expected from a man whose life had been defined by extremes. He died in his study, in the house he had built in Wiltshire after selling the manor, in a leather chair that was comfortable and worn and that smelled like old books and the particular brand of solitude that comes from outliving your relevance. He was 73 years old. Astoria had been dead for 9 years. The blood curse, the one that had stalked her family for generations, had taken her slowly, methodically, the way blood curses do, consuming her from the inside while Draco watched and held her hand and pretended that his potions expertise could do something that 7 centuries of curse breaking had not. Scorpius had his own life. A good life. A life that Draco had worked very hard to make possible, free from the shadow of the Malfoy name, free from the weight of the war, free from the particular kind of guilt that had been Draco's companion since the age of 16. Draco died alone, in his chair, with a book in his lap, and a cup of tea that had gone cold, and the evening light coming through the window, golden and warm, and completely indifferent to the fact that the person it was touching was no longer alive. His last thought was, I should have done better. Not a grand thought, not a philosophical revelation, just the simple, honest, devastating assessment of a man looking back at 73 years of life and seeing, with the clarity that comes only at the end, every moment where he had chosen wrong. Every cruelty, every cowardice, every time he had stood in the presence of evil and done nothing, not because he lacked the courage, but because the cost of courage had seemed, at the time, too high. He should have refused the mark. He should have gone to Dumbledore in 6th year, before the Astronomy Tower, before the Death Eaters, before the year of hell that followed. He should have stood up to his father. He should have been kind to Potter. He should have seen Hermione Granger as a person rather than a category. He should have understood, decades earlier than he did, that the blood in your veins does not determine the person you are. He should have done better. The thought followed him into the dark. And then the dark ended. Draco Malfoy opened his eyes and saw the ceiling of his childhood bedroom at Malfoy Manor. The ceiling was white, ornate, decorated with the serpentine plasterwork that the Malfoys had commissioned 3 centuries ago and that had stared down at every Malfoy child since. He had spent thousands of hours looking at this ceiling, as a child, as a teenager, as a young man trapped in a house that had become a fortress of evil. He knew this ceiling. He also knew that this ceiling was impossible, because the manor had been sold, because the bedroom had been emptied, because Draco Malfoy was 73 years old and dead. He sat up, looked at his hands. Small, pale, unblemished, the hands of a child. He looked at the room. His room. The room as it had been when he was. He looked at the calendar on the wall. The enchanted calendar that his mother had given him. The one that showed phases of the moon and important dates in the wizarding social calendar. July 14th, 1991. He was 11 years old. Draco Malfoy, who had lived 73 years and died in a chair, and whose last thought had been a regret, was 11 years old again. In his childhood bedroom, at Malfoy Manor, with the full, complete, undimmed memories of an entire lifetime lodged inside the skull of a boy who had not yet received his Hogwarts letter. He got out of bed, walked to the mirror, looked at himself. The face was his. Young, unlined, the pointed chin, the pale hair, the grey eyes that would, in another timeline, learn to look at the world with contempt and fear, and the particular brand of aristocratic disdain that was the Malfoy family's most carefully cultivated inheritance. But the eyes in the mirror were not the eyes of an 11-year-old. They were the eyes of a 73-year-old man wearing an 11-year-old's face. Ancient eyes. Tired eyes. Eyes that had seen a war and a death and a lifetime of regret, and that were now, impossibly, inexplicably looking out of a face that had not yet learned to be afraid. What? Draco said, to the mirror, to the room, to the universe that had apparently decided that death was not the end of his story. The bloody hell is happening? The mirror did not answer. Mirrors at Malfoy Manor were enchanted to provide fashion advice, not existential clarity. The first 3 hours were the hardest. Not because of the disorientation, though the disorientation was considerable. Draco had died. He was certain of this. The memory was as clear as every other memory. The chair, the tea, the light, the thought, the dark. He had died, and now he was alive and 11, and in a bedroom that smelled like childhood and furniture polish and the particular scent of old money that permeated every surface of Malfoy Manor. The hardest part was the knowledge. 73 years of knowledge, compressed into the mind of an 11-year-old. Every spell he had ever learned, every potion he had ever brewed, every piece of information, political, magical, personal, that he had accumulated over a lifetime. The full, unabridged, unedited history of the wizarding world from 1991 to 2064, including 2 wars, 3 ministers for magic, the rise and fall of Voldemort, the Potter children's Hogwarts years, and the gradual, painful, imperfect reformation of the society that had produced and sustained the darkness. He knew everything. Who would live? Who would die? Who would betray whom? Where the Horcruxes were hidden? What the prophecy said? What Dumbledore was planning? What Snape was hiding? What Voldemort feared? He knew that Fred Weasley would die laughing, that Lupin and Tonks would die together, that Colin Creevey would die too young, that Sirius would fall through the veil, that Dumbledore would fall from the tower, that Snape would die in the shack with a snake's venom in his veins and a lifetime of love compressed into 3 words. He knew that Harry Potter would walk into the forest and die and come back. He knew everything, and the knowing was crushing. Because knowing the future does not give you the power to change it, knowledge is not the same as ability, and the gap between what you know should happen and what you can make happen is the gap where madness lives. Draco sat on his childhood bed and pressed his hands against his face and breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3, then he stood, walked to his desk, picked up a quill, and began to plan. The plan was not complicated. Complicated plans required complicated execution, and complicated execution produced complications, and complications produced failure. And failure was not an option, because failure meant everything happened again. The same war, the same deaths, the same regrets, the same bloody Tuesday in a chair in Wiltshire. The plan was simple: prevent Voldemort's return. Not defeat him. Defeating Voldemort had required Harry Potter and a prophecy and 7 years of war and the deaths of dozens of good people. Preventing his return required something different, something that could be done before the war began, something that an 11-year-old with 73 years of knowledge and a family name that opened every door in Wizarding Britain could accomplish. Destroy the Horcruxes. Draco knew where they were. All of them. He had learned the locations over the decades from Potter's testimony, from the public record, from the historical analyses that had been published after the war. The diary was in his own house. His father had it, stored in the hidden room beneath the drawing room. The ring was in the gaunt shack. The locket was at Grimmauld Place. The cup was in Bellatrix's vault. The diadem was at Hogwarts. The snake was with Voldemort wherever Voldemort was hiding. And Harry Potter was a Horcrux, carrying a fragment of the Dark Lord's soul in his scar. 7 targets, some accessible, some impossible, all necessary. He wrote the list on parchment, studied it, added notes, locations, protections, vulnerabilities. The diary could be destroyed with a basilisk fang. The ring had a lethal curse. The locket required Parseltongue to open. The cup was behind goblin wards. The diadem was lost in the room of requirement. Nagini was a living being, and Potter's fragment required the killing curse, cast by Voldemort himself, while Potter was protected by the sacrificial shield. The last one was non-negotiable. The fragment in Potter's scar could only be destroyed by Voldemort, which meant that Voldemort had to return, which meant that the plan, the elegant, simple, clean plan of preventing Voldemort's return, was impossible. Voldemort had to return. He had to return so that he could cast the curse that would destroy the fragment in Potter's scar. The war was not optional. Some version of the war had to happen. But the version could be different. Shorter, less lethal, better prepared. If Draco could destroy the other Horcruxes before Voldemort returned, or immediately after, the final confrontation would be simpler, cleaner, and the list of the dead would be shorter. Perhaps short enough to include no names at all. That was the plan. Destroy what could be destroyed early. Prepare for what could not. And when the moment came when Voldemort rose from the cauldron in Little Hangleton, be ready. Not the way they had been ready the first time, which was to say not ready at all. Ready in the way that mattered, with knowledge, with allies, with a strategy that accounted for every variable and that did not rely on the improvised heroics of teenagers who were making it up as they went along. Draco Malfoy was no longer a teenager. He was a 73-year-old man in an 11-year-old body, and he was going to fight the most efficient war in the history of the wizarding world. The first problem was his father. Lucius Malfoy was, in July of 1991, at the peak of his influence. Member of the Hogwarts Board of Governors. Benefactor of the Ministry. The most politically connected pure blood in Britain, occupying the particular sweet spot of power that exists between wealth and respectability, where the money opens doors and the reputation keeps them open. Lucius was also a Death Eater. Not an active one. The Dark Lord was gone, or appeared to be gone, and the mark on Lucius's arm had faded to a grey shadow, but a committed one. Lucius believed. Not in Voldemort exactly. Lucius was too intelligent and too self-interested to believe in any individual, but in the ideology. In the hierarchy of blood, in the natural superiority of pure blood wizards over muggle-borns and half-bloods and the rest of the magical world's teeming, undifferentiated masses. Draco had spent 73 years understanding his father, understanding the fear that drove the ideology, the terror of irrelevance, the panic of a man watching the world change and feeling his place in it erode, understanding the love that coexisted with the cruelty, because Lucius loved Draco, had always loved Draco, with a love that was genuine and fierce and completely incapable of expressing itself in any way that did not involve control. Understanding was not the same as forgiving. Draco had not forgiven his father. But he had reached, over decades, a place of clarity about who Lucius was and what Lucius wanted, and how to navigate the complicated, dangerous, emotionally treacherous landscape of being Lucius Malfoy's son. He navigated it now. "Father," Draco said, at breakfast, on the morning of July 15th, sitting at the dining table with the posture and the diction and the careful, measured delivery that Lucius expected from his heir, "I've been thinking about Hogwarts." "Good," Lucius said from behind the prophet. "Thinking is an admirable habit. I've been thinking about alliances, about whom I should cultivate at school." Lucius set down the paper. Draco had his attention. The word cultivate was one of Lucius's favourites, a word that implied strategic thinking and long-term planning, and the particular brand of social engineering that the Malfoys had practiced for centuries. "Go on." "The political landscape has changed since your time at school. The old pure-blood families are still important, but their influence is declining. The ministry is diversifying. The Visengamot is admitting Muggle-borns. The power structure is shifting. It is shifting in the wrong direction. Perhaps, but the direction is less important than the response. If the structure is shifting, the question is not how to stop the shift, that's impossible, but how to position ourselves within the new structure." Lucius looked at his son, at the 11-year-old boy who was speaking with the strategic vocabulary of a 40-year-old politician. Something flickered in Lucius's grey eyes. Not suspicion, exactly, but interest. The particular interest of a man who has been training his heir since birth and who is now seeing the training produce results that exceed his expectations. "You sound like your grandfather," Lucius said. "Grandfather was a pragmatist. Grandfather was a survivor. There is a difference. Not in the current climate." Lucius was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, the Malfoy nod, slight, controlled, the nod of a man giving permission without making it obvious that permission was being sought. "What do you propose?" "I propose that I approach Hogwarts strategically. Not with the assumption that Slytherin is the only house worth knowing, with the understanding that alliances across house lines may be more valuable than alliances within them. That is a controversial position. It is a practical one. Potter is going to Hogwarts this year." The name landed on the breakfast table like a dropped plate. "Potter," Lucius said. "Harry Potter. The boy who lived. The most famous wizard of his generation. He's been raised by Muggles. He knows nothing about our world. He is, at this moment, the most valuable unallocated asset in Wizarding Britain. He is the boy who destroyed the Dark Lord. He is the boy who survived the Dark Lord. Destruction is a matter of interpretation. And regardless of what happened that night, Potter is going to Hogwarts, and the person who befriends him first will have access to the most politically significant figure of the next 20 years. You want to befriend Potter. I want to understand him. Befriending is a possible outcome, not a requirement." Lucius studied his son. The grey eyes, mirrors of his own, were steady, clear, and completely unreadable. Lucius had spent decades learning to read people, and he could not read his own child. "Very well," Lucius said. "But be careful, Draco. Potter is complicated. The circumstances of his survival are not fully understood, and the people who surround him, Dumbledore in particular, are not to be underestimated." "I know," Draco said. He knew more than Lucius could possibly imagine. The train. September 1st, 1991. Draco had made the approach wrong the first time. He knew this, had known it for 62 years, since the moment on platform 9 3/4 when he had walked up to Harry Potter and offered friendship the way his father had taught him to offer it, as a transaction, a business deal, an exchange of social capital for political access. You'll soon find out, some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there. The words had been his father's. The tone had been his father's. The entire approach, the superiority, the condescension, the assumption that friendship was something you offered from a position of strength to someone in a position of weakness, had been Lucius Malfoy's philosophy of human connection, delivered by an 11-year-old boy who did not yet understand that philosophy was a lie. This time, Draco did it differently. He found the compartment. Potter was there, sitting with Ron Weasley, surrounded by chocolate frog wrappers and the particular energy of two boys who have just met and who are in the process of becoming best friends. Draco knocked. "Open the door." "Is there room?" Potter looked at him. Green eyes. The scar. The face that Draco had spent 7 years hating and 20 years regretting and 30 years trying to make peace with. "Yeah," Potter said. "Come in." Draco sat down, looked at the chocolate frogs, looked at Weasley, who was looking at him with the particular suspicion of a boy who has been raised on stories about the Malfoy family and who is not sure whether the boy in front of him is a person or a cautionary tale. "I'm Draco," he said. "Draco Malfoy." The name landed. Weasley's face hardened. Potter's face, and this was the thing Draco remembered from the first time, the thing he had not understood at 11 but understood perfectly at 73, Potter's face remained open. Curious, waiting, Potter had not been pre-programmed against the Malfoys. Potter had been raised by Muggles. Potter did not know the history, the rivalries, the century of bad blood between the old families. Potter was a blank slate, and the first time around, Draco had scrawled his father's prejudices all over it. "Not this time. You're Harry Potter," Draco said. "I've heard about you." "Everyone's heard about me," Potter said. "I'm apparently famous for something I don't remember. That must be strange. It's weird. People keep shaking my hand. They'll stop eventually. Wizarding Society has a short attention span." Potter smiled. The smile was small, cautious. The smile of a boy who has not had much practice smiling and who is not yet sure whether the person across from him is safe. "What house are you hoping for?" Potter asked. "I'll probably be in Slytherin." "Family tradition." Weasley made a sound, a small, involuntary sound that communicated, in the language of 11-year-old boys, approximately 3 generations of anti-Slytherin sentiment. Draco looked at Weasley, looked at the red hair, the freckles, the hand-me-down robes, looked at the face of the boy who would become, in another timeline, one of the bravest people Draco had ever known. A man who had fought a war and lost a brother and married the smartest woman of his generation, and who had, at the age of 17, destroyed a Horcrux with a sword. "You're a Weasley," Draco said. "Yeah, I'm told our families don't get along." "Your dad's a..." Ron stopped, glanced at Harry. Recalibrated, "Yeah, they don't. That's our father's problem, not ours." The compartment went quiet. Ron's face did something complicated. The rapid processing of information that did not match his expectations. The cognitive friction of encountering a Malfoy who was not behaving like a Malfoy. "Right," Ron said slowly, "not ours." "Want a chocolate frog?" Harry offered Draco. Draco took it. Ate it. The chocolate was the same as it had been 62 years ago. Sweet. Rich, with the faintly unsettling experience of a live chocolate amphibian attempting to escape your mouth. "These are disgusting," Draco said. "They're brilliant," Ron said. "They're both," Harry said. And Draco, sitting in a train compartment with the two people he had spent his first life antagonizing and his second life would spend protecting, felt something he had not felt since before the war. Hope. Not the naive hope of a child who believes the world is good. The informed hope of a man who knows exactly how bad the world can get and who has decided, with the full weight of 73 years of experience, that the world can be made better. If you know what's coming. If you're willing to pay the price. If you do not waste the second chance. Draco had been given a second chance. He was not going to waste it. The sorting hat descended over Draco's head and found something it had never encountered. Not a child. The hat sorted children, had been sorting them for 1,000 years, reading the unformed, malleable, potential rich minds of 11-year-olds and placing them where their dominant qualities could be developed. The hat understood children. Children were simple, not in the pejorative sense, simple the way seeds are simple, containing everything they will become, but not yet having become it. The mind beneath the hat was not a seed, it was a forest. Dense, layered, vast, containing 73 years of growth and damage and regrowth, and the particular complexity that comes from a life lived fully and regretted completely. This is unusual, the hat said. I imagine it is, Draco thought. You are not 11 years old. My body is 11. The rest of me is considerably older. I can see that. I can see everything. The war, the mark, the tower, the deaths, the decades after, the chair, the regret. Then you understand why I'm here. I understand that you believe you are here to fix things. What I do not understand is how you came to be here at all. This is not a known magical phenomenon. Souls do not simply return to their younger bodies. And yet here I am. And yet, here you are. The question, Miss Malfoy, is where to put you. Slytherin, are you certain? The mind I am reading is not purely Slytherin. It contains regret, which is a Gryffindor burden. It contains knowledge, which is Ravenclaw's domain. It contains a desperate desire to protect others, which Hufflepuff would recognize as its own. I need Slytherin. I need to be inside the house to change it. I need access to the families, the politics, the internal dynamics. The war was won last time by Gryffindors fighting Death Eaters. This time, I intend to win it by dismantling the Death Eater recruitment pipeline from the inside. That is a remarkably strategic approach. I'm a Slytherin. Strategy is what we do. Very well. But I must warn you, the knowledge you carry is a burden. The temptation to play God, to manipulate events, to treat people as pieces on a board, that temptation will be considerable. And you have been a man who succumbs to temptation, Mr. Malfoy. Your history demonstrates this. My history is why I'm here. To do better. Then let us hope your second act is an improvement on your first. Slytherin. The Great Hall applauded. The Slytherin table received him with the satisfied entitlement of a house that had expected the Malfoy heir and had received him. Draco walked to the table, sat down, looked at the faces around him, the faces he knew, the faces he had lived with and fought beside and, in some cases, fought against. Theodore Nott, who would be asked to follow his father into darkness and who could, with the right intervention, be redirected. Daphne Greengrass, whose sister Astoria would one day be the love of Draco's life, and who was, right now, a quiet 11-year-old with a careful expression. Pansy Parkinson, who had been his girlfriend in another lifetime, and who had shouted someone grab him. When Voldemort demanded Harry's surrender, and who had spent the rest of her life regretting that moment. All of them. Known, mapped, their futures visible to Draco like roads on a chart, the paths they would take, the turns they would make, the destinations they would reach. And all of those destinations could be changed. Were already being changed by the simple fact of Draco's presence, by the different person sitting in the same seat, by the choices he had already made and the choices he would continue to make. At the staff table, Dumbledore caught his eye. The twinkle, the slight nod, the acknowledgement of a man who did not yet know what Draco was, but who sensed, with the instinct that had kept him alive for 150 years, that something had shifted in the fabric of the world. Snape sat beside Dumbledore. Black eyes, unreadable face. The man who would, in the years to come, become the most unexpected friendship of Draco's second life. And at the Gryffindor table, 3 seats from the end, Harry Potter was eating roast chicken and talking to Ron Weasley and being, for the first and only time in his life, a completely ordinary 11-year-old boy at a feast. Draco watched him. The green eyes, the scar, the face that would, over the next 7 years, become the face of the resistance, the rebellion, the fight against everything that Draco's family had built and supported and profited from. In another life, that face had been the enemy. In this life, it was going to be the friend. Draco ate his dinner, made polite conversation with the students around him, complimented Daphne on her sorting, not because he was interested in her, not yet, not for decades, but because the compliment was kind, and kindness was the currency he intended to trade in this time around. And in the quiet space behind his occlumency shields, where the 73-year-old lived and watched and planned, Draco Malfoy began the work. The real work. Not the Horcruxes, those were tasks, items on a list, problems with solutions. The real work was harder. The real work was changing himself, unlearning the prejudices, dismantling the architecture of superiority that his father had built inside his mind, replacing contempt with curiosity, replacing fear with trust, replacing the cold, calculating, transactional approach to human relationships that had defined his first life with something warmer, something messier, something that did not fit neatly into a strategic framework, something that looked from the outside remarkably like love. Not romantic love. Not yet. That would come later, with Astoria, in the same way it had come before, suddenly, completely, irreversibly, but the other kind. The kind that exists between friends, between allies, between people who have chosen each other not because of blood or status or strategic advantage, but because of the simple, profound, revolutionary recognition that the person across from you is worth knowing. Draco had not known this in his first life, had not understood that the people his father dismissed, the Weasleys, the Grangers, the Potters, were not lesser, but different, and that different was not a threat, but an opportunity. He understood it now, had spent 73 years learning it, and the learning had cost him everything. His youth, his innocence, his first life, the decades of guilt and regret that had accumulated like sediment in the riverbeds of his consciousness. But the learning was done. The lesson was complete. And the lesson was simple, so simple that it could be stated in 4 words: people are worth knowing. That was the lesson. The entire lesson. The one that had taken 73 years and a death and a rebirth to learn. People are worth knowing. All of them. The brave ones and the cowardly ones and the brilliant ones and the ordinary ones. The pure bloods and the muggle-borns and the half-bloods and the squibs. The Gryffindors and the Slytherins and the Ravenclaws and the Hufflepuffs. All of them. Worth knowing. Worth saving. Worth the impossible, exhausting, magnificent effort of coming back from death to make sure they survived. Draco finished his dinner, went to the dormitory, lay in his childhood bed, looked at the ceiling, and began. The common room, the dormitory, the green light of the lake through the windows. Draco lay in his childhood bed, the same dormitory, the same ceiling, and listened to the sounds of the other first-year boys settling in. Theodore Knott, Blaise Zabini, Crabbe, Goyle, the boys who had been, in another life, his entourage, his court, the supporting cast in the small, petty drama of Draco Malfoy's adolescence. He knew them. All of them. Knew who they would become, who they would serve, what they would do in the war that was coming. Knott would follow his father into darkness. Zabini would maintain a calculated neutrality that was impressive in its discipline and devastating in its cowardice. Crabbe would die in fiendfire of his own making. Goyle would survive, damaged, diminished, a man defined by the friend he lost and the fire that took him. Draco knew all of this, and the knowing was a weight that pressed on his chest like a stone. He could save them. Not all of them. Some paths were set too deep. Some choices were too rooted in family and ideology and the particular kind of inherited darkness that no amount of intervention could fully dislodge. But some of them. Crabbe? He could save Crabbe. By being different. By modelling a different way of being Slytherin. By demonstrating through his own choices that the path their fathers had chosen was not the only path available. But that was long-term work. Patient work. The slow, relentless, invisible work of changing culture from the inside. One conversation at a time, one relationship at a time, one small act of decency at a time. The immediate work was the diary. The diary was in his father's study, in the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, behind wards that Draco had learned to bypass at the age of 13 in his first life, and that he could now bypass with the casual competence of a man who had spent decades studying ward theory. He went home for Christmas break. This was normal. Malfoy heirs came home for Christmas. It was expected. It was tradition. It was one of the approximately 700 traditions that the Malfoy family maintained, with the obsessive attention to precedent that substituted, in aristocratic families, for genuine emotional connection. The house was decorated. The tree was in the entrance hall. The elves had been working for 3 days to produce the particular standard of festive perfection that Narcissa required. Narcissa? Draco saw his mother, and the 73-year-old inside him cracked. She was young, 41. Beautiful in the severe, polished way that pure-blood women were beautiful. Not warm, not approachable, but striking. The way a winter landscape is striking. Her hair was blonde, her posture was perfect, and her eyes contained the thing that Draco had not fully understood until he was much older. Fear. Narcissa Malfoy was afraid, had been afraid for years, afraid of the mark on her husband's arm, afraid of the ideology that surrounded her like a prison, afraid for her son, who was being raised inside the prison, and who would, she feared, become a prisoner himself. Draco looked at his mother and saw, with the clarity of a man who has already lost her, the full scope of what Narcissa had done and would do in the years to come. The unbreakable vow with Snape, the lie in the forest, "Is Draco alive?" that had saved Harry Potter and ended the war. The years after, standing beside Draco at trials, rebuilding, enduring. Narcissa was the bravest person Draco had ever known, and she did not know it. Would not know it for years. Draco, Narcissa said at Christmas dinner, watching her son with the attentive concern of a mother who has noticed something different but cannot identify what. "You seem older. I'm growing up. Mother, you're 11. Some people grow up faster than others." Narcissa looked at her son. The grey eyes, mirrors of her own, held a depth that she had not seen before. Not the shallow, reactive intelligence of a child. Something deeper. Something that looked, from the right angle, like wisdom. "Are you happy at school?" she asked. "I'm learning." "That's not what I asked. Happiness and learning are connected, Mother. The more I learn, the closer I get to happy." Narcissa studied him, then did something that Lucius, who was at the other end of the table absorbed in the prophet, did not see. She reached across and touched Draco's hand. The touch was brief. Gentle, the touch of a mother communicating in the only language the Malfoy household permitted, that she saw her son, and that what she saw was good. That night, after his parents were asleep, Draco went to the study. The wards were sophisticated. 7 layers. Blood recognition. Intent detection. The full suite of Malfoy protective magic, designed to keep the family's most dangerous possessions secure from everyone, including family members who had not been authorized. Draco was not authorized. But Draco was 73 years old in an 11-year-old body, and 73 years of magical experience made 7 layers of ward work approximately as challenging as opening a door. He dismantled them, layer by layer, silently, with a precision that came from decades of practice, and a patience that came from knowing with absolute certainty that the object behind the wards was a piece of Voldemort's soul, and that leaving it in his father's possession would lead to Ginny Weasley being possessed, a basilisk being unleashed, and Hogwarts nearly being closed. He found the diary. Black, leather-bound, ordinary-looking. A muggle notebook that a teenage Dark Lord had turned into a repository for a fragment of his soul. He held it, felt the magic inside it, the dark, pulsing, aware magic of a Horcrux, pressing against the edges of the object, trying to reach him, trying to establish the connection that it had established with Ginny Weasley in another timeline, the connection through which Tom Riddle had poured himself into a child's mind and consumed her from the inside. The magic pressed against Draco's occlumency shields and bounced off. Because Draco Malfoy had spent 60 years practicing occlumency, and his shields were not the amateur constructions of a schoolboy, but the reinforced, battle-tested, architecturally sound fortifications of a man who had lived through a war and had learned, through pain and necessity, to protect his mind the way you protect a fortress. The diary could not touch him. He put it in his bag, took it back to Hogwarts, and on a Wednesday afternoon in January in the Room of Requirement, which he knew how to find because he had used it extensively in his 6th year for purposes he preferred not to remember, he destroyed it. Not with a basilisk fang. He did not have a basilisk fang. He destroyed it with fiendfire. This was extraordinarily dangerous. Fiendfire was cursed fire, uncontrollable, all-consuming, the most destructive force in the magical world. Using it inside a school was insane. Using it as an 11-year-old was suicidal. But Draco was not an 11-year-old. He was a 73-year-old master of dark arts who had spent decades studying the theoretical framework of curse fire and who understood, with the precision of an expert, how to contain it. He cast the fiendfire, directed it at the diary. The diary screamed, a high, thin, inhuman scream that echoed off the walls of the Room of Requirement, and that was, Draco knew, the sound of a soul fragment being destroyed. The fire consumed the book, the leather blackened, the pages curled, and the fragment of Tom Riddle that had lived inside the diary for 50 years was reduced to ash. Draco extinguished the fiendfire, stood in the Room of Requirement, looked at the ashes. 1 down, 6 to go. The ring was next, and the ring was the one that scared him, not because of the curse, though the curse was lethal. In another timeline, the curse on the ring had killed Dumbledore, slowly, painfully, spreading through his blackened hand and up his arm, consuming him over the course of a year. The curse was a death sentence with a delayed fuse. The ring scared Draco because the ring contained the Resurrection Stone. The Resurrection Stone, one of the 3 Deathly Hallows. The stone that could recall the dead, not truly, not physically, but as shades, as echoes, as the visible, audible, heartbreakingly imperfect manifestations of people who had died and who could, through the stone, appear to speak. Draco had died, had lost people, had spent decades mourning Astoria, mourning the friends who fell in the war, mourning the version of himself that might have existed if he had made different choices. The temptation of the stone was enormous. He could see Astoria, could hear her voice, could look into her face, not a photograph, not a memory, but a shade that moved and spoke and was, in some diminished but real way, present. The temptation was the test, and Draco, who had spent 73 years learning the difference between what he wanted and what was right, recognized it for what it was. A trap. The same trap that had killed Cadmus Peverell. The same trap that had consumed the second brother in the story, who had used the stone to call back the woman he loved, and who had been driven mad by the impossibility of holding something that was present but not real. Draco did not take the stone. He destroyed the ring. Fiend fire again, controlled, contained, surgical, and left the stone in the ashes. It was a hallow. It could not be destroyed by cursed fire, but it could be left. Buried, forgotten, he buried it in the forest near the gaunt shack, in the earth, where it would wait for Harry Potter, who would need it at the end, in the forest, on the night he walked toward death. 2 down, 5 to go. The locket was the problem he could not solve alone. It was at Grimmauld Place, in the possession of Kreacher, the Black family house elf, who had been carrying it since Regulus Black had sacrificed himself to retrieve it from the cave, and who had been unable to destroy it, because Kreacher did not possess the means, and Regulus's final order, destroy it, had become the elf's defining torment. Draco could not access Grimmauld Place. The house was under Fidelius' charm. The secret keeper was Dumbledore, and Draco, who was, as far as the world knew, an 11-year-old Slytherin with no connection to the Black family, had no legitimate reason to be anywhere near it. He needed help. He went to Dumbledore. This was the most dangerous thing Draco had done so far. More dangerous than the diary. More dangerous than the ring. Because Dumbledore was not a Horcrux to be destroyed or a curse to be circumvented. Dumbledore was the most perceptive wizard alive, and explaining to Dumbledore why an 11-year-old boy possessed information about Horcruxes and Deathly Hallows and the Dark Lord's immortality strategy required a level of honesty that Draco had not planned for and was not sure he could sustain. He went anyway. Because the alternative was letting the locket remain intact. And the locket remaining intact meant that Voldemort's return would be followed by a war in which people died, and Draco had not come back from death to watch the same people die again. "Professor Dumbledore," Draco said, standing in the headmaster's office, looking up at the man behind the desk. "I need to tell you something that you will find difficult to believe." Dumbledore looked at him, blue eyes. Twinkling, the twinkle that Draco had spent his first life interpreting as condescension and his second life recognized as something else entirely. Curiosity, genuine, uncontainable, childlike curiosity about the world and the people in it, and the impossible things that happened in both. "I find many things difficult to believe, Miss Malfoy. I have discovered that difficulty is not a reliable indicator of falseness. Please, sit down." Draco sat, and told him, not everything, not the full 73 years, but enough. The Horcruxes, their locations, the prophecy, the connection between Potter and Voldemort, the broad strokes of the future, Voldemort's return, the war, the deaths, the final confrontation. He did not tell Dumbledore how he knew, did not reveal the rebirth, did not explain the mechanism by which a 73-year-old man had woken up in an 11-year-old's body with full knowledge of the future. "I have a source," Draco said. "A reliable one. I cannot reveal it. But the information is accurate." Dumbledore listened. The twinkle dimmed and brightened and dimmed again, cycling through the emotional frequencies that the headmaster processed internally while maintaining the serene, slightly bemused expression that was his default interface with the world. "You know about the Horcruxes," Dumbledore said. "I know about all of them. The diary? Destroyed. I did it myself. In January." Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. "You destroyed a Horcrux. At the age of 11, I used fiend fire in the room of requirement. You used fiend fire in a school at the age of 11. The room contained it. The room? Dumbledore stopped, removed his glasses, cleaned them, put them back on. This was, Draco knew from decades of observation, the Dumbledore equivalent of screaming. "Miss Malfoy," Dumbledore said, "I have been headmaster of this school for nearly 40 years. In that time I have encountered prodigies, geniuses, and the occasional student who was, by any reasonable measure, extraordinary. I have never encountered an 11-year-old who has independently identified and destroyed a fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul using the most dangerous spell in existence. There's a first time for everything." Indeed, Dumbledore studied him. The blue eyes, ancient and penetrating, looking at Draco with the particular intensity of a man who is not fooled by the explanation he has been given, but who recognizes that the explanation, whatever its source, has produced results. "The ring," Dumbledore said. "You mentioned a ring. Destroyed. Gaunt shack. I left the stone." "The stone." "The resurrection stone. It was set in the ring. I left it buried near the shack. Potter will need it." "How do you know Potter will need it?" "My source." "Your source is remarkably well informed. My source has been working on this for a very long time." Dumbledore looked at Draco, looked through him, in the way that Dumbledore looked through everyone, seeing not the surface but the structure beneath, the motivations, the fears, the hidden architecture of the person behind the face. "I believe you," Dumbledore said. "I do not understand you. But I believe you. That's enough." "Is it?" "You are 11 years old, Miss Malfoy. You are a child. Whatever your source is, however you have come by this information, you are asking me to trust the strategic judgment of a child. I am asking you to trust the results. The diary is destroyed. The ring is destroyed. The locket is at number 12 Grimmauld Place, in the possession of a house elf named Creature. The cup is in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault at Gringotts. The diadem is in the room of requirement at this school. And Harry Potter carries a fragment in his scar." Dumbledore was very still. "You know about the fragment in Harry. I know about all of it. Including the fact that you have been raising Harry Potter like a pig for slaughter, preparing him for a sacrifice that you believe is necessary and that I intend to prove is not." The office was very quiet. The portraits on the walls were motionless. Fawkes, on his perch, sang a single note that hung in the air like a question. "That is a harsh assessment," Dumbledore said. "It is an accurate one. And your alternative?" "The killing curse, cast by Voldemort, directed at Potter while the sacrificial shield is active, will destroy the fragment without killing the boy. I know this because," he stopped, chose his words, "because my source has confirmed it. Your source has confirmed something that I have spent years agonizing over, something that the greatest magical theorists of the age cannot determine with certainty. My source has the advantage of perspective." Dumbledore looked at Draco for a very long time. The blue eyes, ancient, wise, carrying the weight of a century of experience and the particular burden of a man who has been playing chess with the fate of the world and who has just discovered that someone else is also playing. "I will retrieve the locket," Dumbledore said. "I will investigate the cup. And I will consider, carefully, thoroughly, your claim about the fragment in Harry's scar. That's all I ask. It is not all you ask, Mr. Malfoy. You are asking me to trust you. And trust, once given, cannot be ungiven. I know. Do you? I have learnt the value of trust the hard way, Professor, multiple times. I suspect you have. I suspect there is a great deal about you that I do not yet understand. There is. I look forward to understanding it. You may not. The truth is complicated. The truth is always complicated, Miss May Malfoy. That is what makes it the truth. Second year arrived without the Chamber of Secrets opening. This was not noticed. You cannot notice the absence of something you never expected. The students attended classes. The professors taught. The castle stood. No students were petrified. No messages were written on walls. No basilisk stirred in the pipes beneath the school. Because the diary was ash. And without the diary, there was no Tom Riddle to possess Ginny Weasley, and without the possession, there was no opening of the chamber, and without the chamber, there was no crisis, and without the crisis, second year at Hogwarts was, for the first time in Harry Potter's experience, and certainly for the first time in Draco's, normal. Draco used the normalcy, built relationships, strengthened the cross-house friendships he had begun on the train, the careful, patient, strategically critical connections between Slytherin and the rest of the school. Harry Potter was in Gryffindor. Ron Weasley was in Gryffindor. Hermione Granger was in Gryffindor. And Draco Malfoy, the Slytherin, was their friend. Not their best friend. Not their confidant. Harry and Ron had their own bond, the immediate, instinctive, uncomplicated bond of two boys who had met on a train and who had chosen each other with the speed and certainty that only 11-year-olds possess. Draco was not part of that bond. He was adjacent to it, a satellite in a stable orbit, close enough to participate, but far enough to maintain his own trajectory. This was deliberate. Draco did not want to replace Ron. Did not want to insert himself into the trio. The trio was important. Its dynamics, its chemistry, the particular combination of Harry's courage and Ron's loyalty and Hermione's intelligence had been the engine of the war's resolution. Disrupting the trio would be strategically catastrophic. What Draco wanted was to add to it, to be the fourth voice. The perspective that the trio lacked, the Slytherin perspective, the inside view, the understanding of how the other side thought and moved and operated. You spend a lot of time with the Gryffindors, Blaise Zabini said one evening in the Slytherin common room, second year. Blaise was sitting in an armchair with the elegant, languorous posture of a boy who had been raised in Italian villas and who treated Hogwarts as a charming but slightly provincial experience. I spend a lot of time with people I find interesting. Weasley is interesting. Weasley is the best chess player in the school. His strategic thinking is extraordinary. His table manners are appalling. His table manners are irrelevant. His mind is not. And Granger? The Muggle-born? Draco looked at Blaise. At the handsome face, the calculated neutrality, the mask of indifference that concealed, Draco knew, a deeply pragmatic mind that was waiting to see which way the wind blew before committing to a direction. Granger is the most talented witch of her generation, Draco said. In 30 years, she will be running the ministry. You can either build a relationship with her now, when the cost is low, or try to build one later, when the cost is high. That's not sentiment, Blaise, that's investment. Blaise raised an eyebrow. You sound like your father. I sound like a better version of my father. My father builds alliances based on blood. I build them based on talent. Talent is more durable. That is a remarkably progressive position for a Malfoy. The Malfoys have survived for 1,000 years by adapting to the world as it is, not as they wish it to be. The world is changing, Blaise. The question is whether you change with it or get left behind. Blaise studied Draco with the measured assessment that was his defining characteristic. Then he nodded, the slight, controlled nod of a man making a strategic adjustment. "I'll sit with you at the Quidditch match," Blaise said. "If Granger is there." "She'll be there. She's started following Quidditch. Weasley is corrupting her." How tragic. How inevitable. Third year brought Sirius Black. And with Sirius came the first real test of Draco's knowledge. He knew Sirius was innocent, knew about Pettigrew, knew about the Animagus transformation, the Secret Keeper switch, the 12 years of wrongful imprisonment. He also knew that the timeline's original resolution, the Shrieking Shack confrontation, Pettigrew's escape, Sirius's continued fugitive status had been messy, painful, and ultimately incomplete. Sirius had spent 2 more years running before dying in the Department of Mysteries, falling through the veil, never exonerated, never free. Draco could change this, could expose Pettigrew before the confrontation, could provide evidence that would exonerate Sirius and imprison the real traitor. The question was how. The answer, as with most things in Draco's second life, involved Snape. Severus Snape was the most complicated relationship of both of Draco's lives. In the first life, Snape had been mentor, head of house, the man who had made the unbreakable vow with Narcissa and who had protected Draco through the worst year of his life. Draco had not understood Snape until after the war, until the Pensieve memories were made public, until the full scope of what Snape had done, the decades of espionage, the unrequited love, the sacrifice, became common knowledge. In the second life, Snape was the key, the single most important piece on the board, because Snape was the only person at Hogwarts who was positioned to act on both sides of the coming war, the only person who had Dumbledore's trust and Voldemort's confidence and the particular kind of ruthless, a moral competence that made him capable of operating in both worlds simultaneously. Draco needed Snape. And Snape needed to understand what Draco knew without Draco revealing how he knew it. He went to Snape in October of 3rd year, knocked on the office door, sat in the chair. "Professor, I need to discuss something sensitive." Snape looked at him with the expression that Snape used for all students, the flat, disinterested, vaguely contemptuous expression that communicated, more effectively than words, that whatever you were about to say had better be worth his time. "The defense professor's pet rat," Draco said. "The one that belongs to Ron Weasley. Scabbers, what about it?" "It's not a rat. It's an animagus. Peter Pettigrew." Snape's expression did not change, but his body did. The subtle stiffening, the shift in weight, the physical response of a man whose carefully maintained composure has been tested by information he was not expecting. That is a remarkable claim. It's a verifiable one. Cast the animagus detection spell. Hominum Revelio will also work. It detects human presence, including humans in animal form. And how, precisely, does a 13-year-old student know the identity of a rat that has been disguised as a pet for 12 years? The same way I knew about the diary. My source. Your mysterious source. My reliable source. Snape studied him, the black eyes, flat and penetrating, assessing Draco with the particular intensity of a man who has spent decades identifying liars and who is confronted by someone who is not lying but who is not telling the whole truth either. "If Pettigrew is alive," Snape said, slowly, "then Black is innocent." "Yes, and the Dark Lord's supposed betrayer, the man who delivered the Potters to their deaths, is sleeping in a Gryffindor dormitory. Yes, that is concerning. It is actionable. If Pettigrew is captured and forced to confess under Veritaserum, Sirius Black is exonerated. The actual traitor is imprisoned. And Potter gains a godfather who is not a fugitive. You seem very invested in Potter's welfare. I am invested in outcomes that prevent a war. An exonerated Black, working openly with Dumbledore and the Order, strengthens the defensive position significantly." Snape looked at Draco with an expression that no student had ever provoked. Not the mask, not the performance, something real, something that contained, beneath the suspicion and the calculation, a flicker of recognition. "You think like a spy," Snape said. "I think like a survivor. Those are often the same thing." Snape acted. Verified Draco's claim with the detection spell, cast during a potions class, when Weasley's bag was open and the rat was sleeping inside it, the spell confirming what Draco already knew. Pettigrew was human. Pettigrew was alive. Pettigrew had been hiding in plain sight for 12 years. The arrest happened that evening. Auras, Veritaserum, a confession that was broadcast via enchanted parchment to every member of the Wizengamot. Sirius Black was exonerated by Christmas. The moment Harry learned the truth, that his godfather was innocent, that the real traitor had been captured, that Sirius wanted to know him, was a moment Draco watched from across the Great Hall, sitting at the Slytherin table, eating his breakfast, allowing himself a small private smile that no one noticed and that no one would have understood if they had. One more piece moved, one more death prevented, one more thread in the tapestry of the future rewoven. The war was still coming. Voldemort would still return. But the board was different now, better positioned, less cluttered with the debris of avoidable tragedies. Draco ate his breakfast, planned his next move. The Triwizard Tournament was the thing Draco could not prevent. He had tried. Had gone to Dumbledore in the summer before 4th year, had told him that the tournament was a trap, that someone would enter Potter's name, that the goblet would be confounded by a powerful Confundus charm cast by a Death Eater disguised as a retired Auror. Bartemius Crouch Jr., Draco said. He's alive. He's been hidden by his father for years. He'll escape, take Polyjuice, impersonate Mad-Eye Moody, and enter Potter's name in the goblet. Dumbledore listened, considered, and made a decision that Draco had not anticipated. I will allow the tournament to proceed. Professor, the tournament is the mechanism by which Voldemort intends to return. If we prevent the tournament, Voldemort will find another mechanism. One we do not know about. One we cannot prepare for. People could die. People will die regardless. The question is whether they die in circumstances we control or circumstances we do not. That's cold. It is strategic. You, of all people, should understand that. Draco understood. He did not agree, but he understood, and the understanding was in itself a form of agreement. Because Dumbledore was right, Voldemort's return was inevitable, and a controlled return was better than an uncontrolled one. They prepared. Dumbledore identified the imposter early, before the goblet, before the selection, before the first task. Crouch Jr. was captured, interrogated, and the information he provided confirmed what Draco had already told Dumbledore about the plan. The tournament proceeded. Potter competed. But the portkey in the maze, the one that was supposed to take Potter to the graveyard, was intercepted. Replaced, redirected to a location where Dumbledore and the Order were waiting. Voldemort's return happened anyway. The ritual, the cauldron, the bone and the blood and the flesh. Voldemort rose from the dark water, reborn, terrible, but he rose into an ambush. The Order was there. Dumbledore was there. Snape was there, maintaining his cover, playing the loyal Death Eater, feeding intelligence to both sides with the exhausting, soul-destroying competence that was his particular contribution to the war effort. And Draco was there. Not physically. He was 14, still at Hogwarts, too young for the battlefield. But his intelligence was there. His planning was there. The preparation that had turned a chaotic, improvised, terrifyingly uncertain confrontation into a controlled, anticipated, strategically managed engagement was his work. Voldemort escaped. This was expected. Voldemort was the most powerful dark wizard alive, and even an ambush could not contain him when he had a new body and a wand and the desperate, animal cunning of a man who has just been reborn and who is not going to let himself die again. But the Death Eaters were captured. 12 of them, including Peter Pettigrew again and Lucius Malfoy. Lucius, Draco received the news at Hogwarts, in the Great Hall, at breakfast. The Morning Prophet carried the story, Death Eaters captured at Dark Lord's return, and Draco read it, and saw his father's name on the list, and felt the complicated, contradictory, devastating mixture of grief and relief that defined his relationship with Lucius in every timeline. Grief, because Lucius was his father. Because the man who had taught him to ride a broomstick, and who had read him bedtime stories about the glory of the pure blood families, and who had loved him in his limited, controlling, fundamentally broken way, was going to Azkaban. Relief, because Lucius in Azkaban meant Lucius was not at the manor, meant Lucius was not hosting Voldemort, meant the manor would not become, as it had in another timeline, a headquarters of darkness, meant Narcissa was safe, or at least safer, free from the impossible position of serving a Dark Lord under her own roof. Draco read the paper, set it down, ate his toast, and when Blaise asked, carefully, neutrally, "Are you all right?" Draco said, "I'm exactly where I need to be." The war that followed was shorter. Cleaner, not bloodless. War is never bloodless. The idea of a clean war is an oxymoron that only people who have never fought in one can believe in. But shorter. The Horcruxes were mostly destroyed. The locket had been retrieved by Dumbledore in second year and destroyed with the sword of Gryffindor. The cup was extracted from Gringotts in a covert operation that Draco designed, and that Bill Weasley, the curse breaker, executed with the kind of elegant precision that made Draco briefly consider whether he had chosen the wrong Weasley to befriend. The diadem was destroyed at Hogwarts by Draco himself, in the Room of Requirement, with Fiendfire. For the third time. "You have a concerning fondness for cursed fire," Dumbledore noted when Draco reported the destruction. "It's efficient. It is catastrophically dangerous. Those are not mutually exclusive." "You sound like a Gryffindor." "I will pretend you did not say that." Nagini was the hardest. The snake was always with Voldemort, always protected, always wrapped around the Dark Lord like a living security system. Killing Nagini required getting close to Voldemort, and getting close to Voldemort required either extraordinary courage or extraordinary cunning. Draco had both. But the courage he deployed in his second life was not the hot, impulsive charge into danger courage that Gryffindor celebrated. It was the cold, calculated, patient courage of a man who has lived through a war and who knows that the most important battles are not fought in the open but in the shadows, in the spaces between the dramatic moments, in the small, invisible decisions that accumulate over years and that determine, in the end, which side wins. Neville Longbottom killed Nagini with the sword of Gryffindor at the Battle of Hogwarts. But the battle was different this time. Shorter, less lethal. Because the groundwork had been laid. Because the Horcruxes were already destroyed. Because Voldemort arrived at Hogwarts with one anchor remaining, the fragment in Harry's scar, and the fragment was the one that could only be destroyed by Voldemort himself. Harry walked into the forest, as he always did. As he always had to. But Harry walked into the forest knowing. Dumbledore had told him, not the agonized, belated, guilt-ridden confession that had happened in another timeline, but a planned, prepared, carefully managed conversation that had happened months before the battle, giving Harry time to process, to prepare, to make peace with what he had to do. And Draco had been part of that conversation, had sat in Dumbledore's office with Harry and Dumbledore and Snape, and had laid out the magical theory, the sacrificial shield, the fragment, the mechanism by which Voldemort's curse would destroy the Horcrux without killing Harry. "You're sure?" Harry said, looking at Draco. Green eyes. "The scar? I'm sure. How can you be sure? This is theoretical. It's not theoretical. It's..." Draco stopped. Breathed. "I can't tell you how I know. But I know. The curse will destroy the fragment. The shield will protect you. You will die, and you will come back. That's a hell of a thing to ask someone to believe. I'm not asking you to believe. I'm asking you to trust. Trust a Malfoy? Trust a friend." Harry looked at him. The look was not the suspicious, guarded look of the 11-year-old who had been offered friendship as a transaction on platform 9 3/4. It was the look of a young man who had spent 4 years building a relationship with someone who had consistently, reliably, inexplicably delivered accurate intelligence and sound advice, and who had never, not once, been wrong. "All right," Harry said. "I trust you. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just be right. I'm always right. You're frequently right. There's a difference." "There's really not." Harry walked into the forest. Voldemort cast the curse. The fragment died. Harry lived. And Draco, standing at the edge of the forest, watching, knowing, feeling the weight of 73 years of memory press against the back of his eyes, allowed himself to breathe. The war was over. The second time, and this time the list of the dead was shorter, not empty. The list was never empty. War took lives regardless of preparation, regardless of intelligence, regardless of the best efforts of a man who had come back from death, with the specific intention of preventing death. But shorter. Meaningfully shorter. The names that had haunted Draco for 60 years, Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, Colin Creevey, some of those names were still on the list. War does not respect plans. War does not negotiate. But some of them were not. Fred Weasley survived. Because the wall that had collapsed on him in another timeline did not collapse in this one, because the battle was shorter, because the Death Eaters were fewer, because the preparation had reduced the chaos, and the chaos had been the thing that killed Fred. Fred survived, and that one name, removed from the list, that one person alive who should have been dead, was enough to justify everything. Every deception, every manipulation, every fiend fire in a school building, every moment of the strange, impossible, ethically complicated second life of Draco Malfoy. Fred Weasley was alive. Draco stood at the edge of the forest and cried, not from grief, from relief. The relief of a man who has carried a list for 60 years and who has just crossed off a name. Years later, decades later, the new life. Draco married Astoria. Again, found her at the same function, said the same words, fell in love with the same woman. Some things, Draco learned, were fixed points. Some things happened regardless of timeline, regardless of preparation, regardless of the best efforts of a man who had come back from death to change the world. Astoria was a fixed point. The love was a fixed point. The blood curse was also a fixed point. Draco spent 20 years trying to break the curse, used every resource, every connection, every fragment of knowledge from both his lives, consulted Dumbledore, who was alive in this timeline, alive and healthy, the ring's curse having been avoided because Draco had destroyed the ring before Dumbledore could touch it. Consulted Snape, who had survived the war because the Nagini scenario had played out differently, because Voldemort had not needed to claim the Elder Wand from Snape because the wand's allegiance had been managed differently. He consulted the greatest magical minds of the age. He searched for cures in libraries and archives, and the kind of private collections that only a Malfoy could access. He spent 2 decades fighting a curse that had defeated 7 centuries of curse breakers. And he failed. Astoria died, as she had died before. The blood curse took her, slowly, methodically, the way blood curses do. Draco held her hand, watched her go, felt the grief crack through him like a fissure through stone. "I tried," he told her in the last hour. "I came back. I had 73 years of knowledge. I changed the war, I saved lives, I prevented deaths, but I couldn't save you." Astoria looked at him with eyes that were fading, but that contained still the clarity that had been her defining quality. "You saved everyone else," she said. "That's enough." "It's not." "It is, Draco. It is enough. Not every story has a happy ending, but every story can have a meaningful one." She died. He held her hand. And the grief was the same. In both lifetimes, the same depth, the same devastation. Some things are fixed points, but other things were different. Profoundly, beautifully, irreversibly different. Dumbledore was alive, teaching at Hogwarts. Old, impossibly old, but alive. The hand was not blackened. The fall from the tower had not happened. The man who had spent a century carrying the weight of the wizarding world was still carrying it, and the carrying was lighter because the weight was shared. Snape was alive, teaching potions, still acerbic, still cutting, still the most emotionally constipated man in the wizarding world, but alive, and free of the spiral that had consumed his first life, and slowly, painfully, with the reluctant grace of a man learning a skill he has never practiced, learning to be happy. He came for tea. On Saturdays. At Draco's house. The house in Wiltshire that was not the manor, but that was close enough, comfortable enough, home enough. "You saved my life," Snape said one Saturday, over tea. "I don't know how. I don't know what you did, or what you know, or how you know it. But I am alive because of you. You're alive because you deserve to be. Deserving is a moral category. I am referring to the practical mechanism by which my death was prevented. The practical mechanism is classified. Classified by whom? By me. You are not an authority. I am the person who saved your life. That gives me certain privileges." Snape looked at Draco. At the man who had been his student, and who was now what? Not a friend, exactly. Snape did not have friends. But something. A person whose presence was not unwelcome. A person whose tea was acceptable, and whose company was tolerable, and who understood without being told. That Snape's Saturday visits were the closest thing to social interaction that Snape was capable of sustaining. "More tea?" Draco asked. "If you insist." "I do." "Then I will endure it. Gracefully, I hope. I do nothing gracefully. Grace is for people who have not spent 30 years pretending to be someone they are not. 30 years of pretending is over. Severus, you can be whoever you want now. I do not know who that is. Neither do I. That's what the tea is for." Sirius was alive. Free. Exonerated since third year. Living in Grimmauld Place, which he had renovated with the manic energy of a man who had spent 12 years in Azkaban and who was making up for lost time. Harry visited every weekend. The godfather-godson relationship that had been abbreviated by the veil in another timeline was, in this one, full and complete and loud and chaotic and exactly what both of them needed. Fred Weasley was alive, running Weasley's Wizard Wheezes with George. The shop was expanding. A second location had opened in Hogsmeade. The twins were, as they had always been, forces of nature, creative, chaotic, relentlessly funny, completely incapable of taking anything seriously except the things that mattered, which they took more seriously than anyone. Draco visited the shop once. Anonymously, in disguise. Not because he was ashamed, but because the experience of walking into a joke shop and watching Fred Weasley, alive, laughing, demonstrating a skiving snack box to a group of delighted children, was something that Draco wanted to experience without the complication of being recognised. He stood in the corner. Watched, felt the tears come, and did not wipe them away, because some tears are earned and some tears are sacred, and the tears of a man watching a dead friend live are both. Fred Weasley was alive. Because of Draco. Because of a plan made in a bedroom at Malfoy Manor by a boy who was not a boy. Because of Fiendfire and Horcruxes and a conversation with Dumbledore and 1,000 small decisions that had accumulated over years into a different world. A better world. Not a perfect world. Perfection was a lie. A destination that did not exist on any map that Draco had ever consulted. but better. Measurably, tangibly, demonstrably better. Fewer names on the memorial wall. That was the measure. The only measure that mattered. Draco died on a Tuesday. Again, in a chair. In the house in Wiltshire. With a book in his lap and a cup of tea that had gone cold. He was 91 years old. He had outlived his first life by 18 years, which he attributed to the reduction in stress that came from not carrying 60 years of war guilt and the improvement in diet that came from not drinking fire whiskey every evening. Scorpius was there, and Scorpius's children, Draco's grandchildren, 2 of them, a boy and a girl who had inherited the Malfoy silver blonde hair and Astoria's kindness, and who called him grandfather with the particular combination of affection and exasperation that grandchildren reserve for grandparents who are simultaneously beloved and impossible. The Potters visited. Harry, grey-haired now, the scar faded to a thin silver line. Ginny, their children, grown. Albus, who was Scorpius's best friend as he had been in both timelines, because some things are fixed points. Ron came. Hermione came. The people who had started as strategic alliances and become, over decades, the thing that alliances become when they are sustained by genuine affection rather than mutual advantage. Friends. Real ones. The kind you cannot manufacture or manipulate or strategize into existence. The kind that simply happen through proximity and time and the accumulation of shared experience. Draco sat in his chair and looked at the people in his house and felt something that was different from his first death. Not regret. Not the crushing, suffocating weight of should have done better. Something else. Satisfaction. Not the smug, self-congratulatory satisfaction of a man admiring his own work. The quiet, private, hard-earned satisfaction of a man who was given a second chance and who did not waste it. The list of the dead was shorter. The memorial wall had fewer names. The world was not perfect. The world would never be perfect, because perfection was a lie and the pursuit of it was a trap. But it was better. By one name. By several names, by every name that was not carved in stone because Draco Malfoy had come back from death and had changed things. Not everything, not enough, never enough, but something. And something was the difference between a life of regret and a life of meaning. His last thought, this time, was not, I should have done better. His last thought was, I did what I could, and it was enough. The dark came again, but this time, the dark was warm. But we have skipped too much. The texture is in the details, the conversations nobody recorded, the relationships that changed the war before the war began. Let us go back to the spaces between the milestones. Hermione Granger figured it out in 3rd year. Not the rebirth. She did not figure out that Draco was a 73-year-old man in a 13-year-old's body. She figured out that Draco knew things he should not know. That his knowledge was too deep, too specific, too perfectly calibrated to be the product of an 11-year-old's research, however precocious. She confronted him in the library. Because Hermione confronted everything in the library, the way other people confronted things in corridors or common rooms or the backs of broomstick sheds, the library was Hermione's arena, her home ground, the place where she was most herself and most dangerous. You knew about Pettigrew, she said, sitting down across from him at his usual table, the one in the back corner near the restricted section, the one that offered sight lines to both exits and minimal exposure to the main traffic patterns of the library, because Draco had spent his entire first life learning to sit with his back to the wall. I provided information to Professor Snape, who acted on it. You knew Peter Pettigrew, a man who has been believed dead for 12 years, was alive and disguised as Ron's pet rat. How? My source. Your source. Yes, the mysterious source that also told you about the diary and the ring and whatever else you've been feeding to Dumbledore. Draco, I have spent 2 years watching you operate, and I need you to understand something about me. What's that? I don't accept my source as an answer. Not from professors, not from Dumbledore, and not from a 13-year-old Slytherin who somehow knows the location of Voldemort's Horcruxes. The word, Horcruxes, landed on the library table like a detonation. How do you know about the Horcruxes? Draco asked. Because I read. Because the information you've been providing to Dumbledore has been producing visible results. The diary's destruction, the ring's destruction, the locket's retrieval, and the pattern suggests a systematic elimination of soul anchors, which means Horcruxes. The only comprehensive text on the subject is Secrets of the Darkest Art, which is in the restricted section, which I accessed using a forged permission slip from Professor Lockhart last year. He signed anything you put in front of him. Lockhart was an idiot. Lockhart was a useful idiot. There's a difference. Now tell me how you know what you know. Draco looked at Hermione Granger, at the bushy brown hair and the brown eyes and the absolutely uncompromising intelligence that was. He had learned over 2 lifetimes, the most powerful force in the wizarding world. Not the most dramatic force, not the most visible, but the most powerful, because Hermione's intelligence was not theoretical, it was applied. She used it, deployed it, aimed it at problems the way other people aimed wands, and she had aimed it at him. If I tell you the truth, Draco said, you won't believe me. Try me. I am not 13 years old. Obviously, no 13-year-old speaks the way you speak, thinks the way you think, or possesses the kind of strategic intelligence that you routinely demonstrate. The question is what you are, if not 13. I am 73, or I was, before I died and woke up here. Hermione stared at him. The rapid processing expression, the one that cycled through analysis and disbelief and reanalysis at a speed that would have been impressive in a supercomputer, activated. You're claiming you were reborn, with your memories intact. Yes, that violates every known principle of magical theory. The soul does not retain temporal memories across incarnation boundaries. The resurrection stone can recall shades, not restore lives. Time turners move the body, not the consciousness. There is no established magical mechanism for what you're describing. I know. And yet you're claiming it happened. I'm claiming it happened because it happened. I don't understand the mechanism. I died in a chair at the age of 73 and woke up in my childhood bed at the age of 11 with complete memories of the next 62 years of history. That is the most extraordinary claim I have ever heard. It is also the most verifiable. I can tell you things that will happen before they happen. I can describe events that have not yet occurred with a specificity that no amount of divination or guesswork could produce. Divination is rubbish. We agree on that. Tell me something. Something I can verify. Something that will happen soon enough to test, but specific enough to be meaningful. Draco thought, considered the timeline. What was coming that was predictable, specific, and verifiable? Next week, Draco said, Professor Trelawney will make a prophecy. A real one. Not the usual theatrical nonsense. A genuine prophecy, delivered in the tower, in the presence of Dumbledore. She will not remember making it. The prophecy will concern the Dark Lord's servant returning to him. Hermione looked at him. The processing expression was still active, cycling through probabilities and possibilities and the fundamental question that separated Hermione Granger from every other intellect at Hogwarts. Not, is this possible? But what are the implications if it is? 1 week, Hermione said. If the prophecy happens as you describe, we continue this conversation. And if it doesn't, then you're delusional, and I'll recommend you to Madame Pomfrey. There, the prophecy happened, exactly as Draco described, word for word. Hermione came back to the library, sat down, looked at Draco with an expression that he had never seen on her face in either lifetime. Awe, not the breathless, uncritical awe of a person overwhelmed by wonder. The analytical, measured, still slightly skeptical awe of the most rigorous mind of her generation encountering something that her rigorous mind could not explain but could no longer deny. "You're from the future," she said. "I'm from a future, one that I am actively working to change. How much do you know?" "Everything. 62 years of history. Every major event. Every battle. Every death. Every political development. Every marriage, birth, and graduation. And you're using this knowledge to prevent deaths. Shorten the war. Eliminate the conditions that allow a Dark Lord to rise. That's, Draco, the ethical implications alone. I know, I've had 73 years to think about them. You're manipulating the future. You're making decisions for people who haven't made them yet. You're eliminating choices before they're made. I am preventing people from dying. If that requires manipulation, I accept the moral cost." That's a very Slytherin position. I am a very Slytherin person. Hermione was quiet for a long time. The library was closing. Madame Pince was making the rounds with the particular aggressive throat clearing that constituted her closing announcement. "I want in," Hermione said. "In? Whatever you're doing, whatever you're planning, I want to be part of it. That could be dangerous. Everything worth doing is dangerous, and I am the most talented witch of my generation. You need me. I know I need you. I've known for 62 years. Then, stop being mysterious and start sharing your intelligence. All of it. Everything you know. Every timeline of every death. Every Horcrux. I want the complete picture. That will take weeks. Then we'd better start now." They started. In the library. In the back corner. Two people, one who was 13 and one who was 73 wearing 13's face, began the process of sharing 62 years of future history, one conversation at a time, one revelation at a time, building the strategic foundation that would, in the years to come, change the course of the war. Hermione took notes. Of course she took notes. The notes eventually filled 14 notebooks, cross-referenced, indexed, color-coded by category, military events in red, political developments in blue, personal relationships in green, deaths in black. The death notebook was the thickest. Draco hated looking at it. "We're going to make this one thinner," Hermione said, holding up the black notebook. "That's the objective. Everything else is secondary." "Agreed? Good now. Tell me about 5th year." Ron found out because Ron always found out. Not through deduction. Ron was not a deductive thinker. Ron was an intuitive thinker, which was different and in many ways more powerful. Deduction followed evidence to conclusions. Intuition followed feeling to truth. And Ron's feeling, which he had been carrying since first year, was that Draco Malfoy was not what he appeared to be. "You're not really a kid," Ron said in the common room at Grimmauld Place the summer before 5th year, where Harry and Ron and Hermione were staying and where Draco had been invited at Dumbledore's suggestion. "I'm 14. Your body is 14. The rest of you is not. What makes you say that?" "Because I've been playing chess with you for 4 years, and you play like my grandfather. Not like a kid who learnt chess from a book. Like someone who's been playing for 50 years. The patterns. The patience. The way you sacrifice pieces, not recklessly, the way kids sacrifice, but strategically, the way old players sacrifice. Because they can see 15 moves ahead, and they know the piece they're losing now will win the game later." Draco looked at Ron, at the freckled face, the red hair, the extraordinary mind that the world consistently underestimated because it was packaged in a body that ate with its mouth open and supported the Chudley cannons. You're more observant than people give you credit for, Draco said. People don't give me credit for much. People are wrong. Yeah, they usually are. So, what are you? Time traveler? Seer? Curse? Reborn? I lived a full life, 73 years, and woke up at 11 with all my memories. Ron processed this with the particular efficiency of a boy who has grown up in a house where impossible things happened on a daily basis, and who had, consequently, a very high threshold for the implausible. Right? Ron said. That explains the chess. That's your response? That explains the chesses? What do you want me to say? That's impossible? I've seen Harry fight a basilisk. I've seen my brothers sell puking pastilles. I've seen my mother cook for 9 people in a kitchen the size of a cupboard. Impossible is relative. That's remarkably philosophical. I'm a Weasley. We're deep. You're eating a biscuit while processing the revelation that your friend is a reincarnated 73-year-old man. Multitasking is also a Weasley trait. Draco almost laughed. Almost, the 73-year-old inside him remembered that the last time Ron Weasley had made him laugh, genuinely laugh, not the controlled strategic chuckle that Malfoys deployed in social situations, had been at a dinner party at the Burrow in 2031 when Ron had accidentally set the Christmas pudding on fire and had tried to extinguish it with eggnog, which had made it worse, and the resulting conflagration had required 2 auras and a fire crab specialist to resolve. I need your help, Draco said. With what? With Harry. He needs to know. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, and why the decisions I'm making are not the decisions a 14-year-old would make. You want me to vouch for you. I want you to be the bridge between the Slytherin with impossible knowledge and the Gryffindor who needs to trust him. Ron thought about this. Ate another biscuit. Thought some more. Harry already trusts you, Ron said. You know that, right? He's trusted you since the train. Since you sat down and didn't insult me. In another timeline, I did insult you. Yeah? I called your family poor and offered Harry friendship as a business transaction. And how did that work out? Badly. For everyone. For decades. Ron looked at him. Really looked. With the penetrating assessment that Ron deployed rarely, but that was, when deployed, as incisive as any analysis Hermione could produce. You're trying to fix it, Ron said. Yes, not just the war, not just the deaths. Everything, every mistake you made, every cruelty, every time you were the person your father wanted you to be instead of the person you could have been. Yes, that's a lot of fixing. It is. And you think you can do it? All of it? By yourself? Not by myself. That's why I'm asking for help. Ron extended his hand. The Weasley handshake, straightforward, uncomplicated, the handshake of a family that did not believe in the strategic deployment of physical contact and that shook hands because shaking hands was what you did when you meant business. Draco took it. All right, Ron said, but you're buying the biscuits from now on. Done, and you're never calling my family poor. I wouldn't dream of it. And you're coming to the Burrow for Christmas. I've already been to the Burrow for Christmas. Twice in another timeline. Then you know Mum's going to try to feed you until you explode. I am counting on it. Harry learned the truth on a Thursday evening, in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, with Ron and Hermione flanking Draco like seconds at a duel. I need to tell you something, Draco said. Something that explains why I've been. The way I've been. Mysterious and slightly terrifying, Harry said. I was going to say strategically informed. You were going to say that because you're a Slytherin, and Slytherins can't just say I've been weird. You have to make it sound like a leadership quality. It is a leadership quality. It's weird, Draco, fine. I've been weird. And the reason is, I'm a reborn 73-year-old man who died in a chair and woke up at 11 with complete memories of a future that included a war. Your death, my death, and the deaths of approximately 50 people we know. Harry stared. Ron ate a biscuit. Hermione produced a notebook. He's not joking, Hermione said. I've verified it multiple times. His predictive accuracy is 100% across 37 tested data points. 38, Draco corrected. The Ballycastle Bats won the league last month. I predicted that in September. Quidditch predictions are not methodologically rigorous. They are when the margin of victory matches my prediction exactly. That's correlation, not Hermione find 38 data points. Harry looked at Draco. At the boy who had been his friend for 4 years, who had consistently known things he shouldn't know, who had quietly, invisibly, systematically been dismantling the Dark Lord's immortality while pretending to be a teenage Slytherin. The war, Harry said. In your timeline. How bad was it? Bad. 2 years of open conflict. Hundreds dead. The Ministry fell. Hogwarts was occupied. The final battle killed 50 people. And me? You walked into the forest. You faced Voldemort. You died. I died. And came back. Because of the Horcrux in your scar, the killing curse destroyed the fragment. The sacrificial shield, your mother's protection, preserved you. So I have to die. You have to be hit with the killing curse while the fragment is in your scar. You will not die permanently. The fragment will. Draco, that's a lot to process. I know, I've had 60 years to process it. You're getting the compressed version. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you needed to grow up first. Not in the patronizing sense, in the literal sense. The person who walks into that forest needs to be old enough to understand what they're doing and why. You are now. I'm 14. You're Harry Potter. You've been old enough for impossible things since you were 1. Harry was quiet. The kitchen was quiet. Sirius, who was upstairs and who would be told later, was not quiet. Sirius was never quiet, but the kitchen was. I trust you, Harry said. I don't entirely understand you, but I trust you. That's enough. Is it? You've been carrying this for 4 years. The knowledge, the weight of it, knowing who dies and when and how and not being able to tell anyone. I told Hermione. Hermione is a vault. Nothing escapes Hermione. I told Ron. Ron processed it in approximately 90 seconds and asked for biscuits. That's how Ron processes everything. That's how Ron survives everything. They looked at each other, the Gryffindor and the Slytherin, the boy who had faced the forest and the man who had come back from death to make sure the boy survived it. Thank you, Harry said, for coming back, for doing this, for 4 years of strategic weirdness. Don't thank me. I'm doing penance. For what? For the life I lived the first time. For every cruelty. Every cowardice. Every time I stood in the presence of evil and chose silence over action. That doesn't sound like the Draco I know. It's not. That's the point. The Draco you know is the Draco I'm trying to be. The Draco I should have been the first time. Then, you've already succeeded. Because the Draco I know is one of the best people I've ever met. The words landed in Draco's chest like warmth. Not the warmth of a compliment, the warmth of absolution. The forgiveness that Draco had been seeking for 73 years, given freely without conditions, by the person whose opinion mattered most. Careful, Potter, you'll make me emotional. God forbid. Precisely, the Battle of Hogwarts, when it came, was different from any battle Draco had experienced. Not because of the strategy. The strategy was sound, carefully planned, the product of 4 years of preparation and 62 years of hindsight. Not because of the execution. The execution was as clean as any battle can be, which is to say messy and chaotic and full of moments where the plan went sideways and the improvisers took over. battle was different because Draco knew what was supposed to happen, knew which walls would fall and which corridors would flood with Death Eaters and which students would be caught in the crossfire. And he used that knowledge, all of it, every fragment, every detail, to redirect, to prevent, to change. He positioned Fred Weasley on the east side of the castle, away from the corridor where the wall had fallen in another timeline. He moved Colin Creevey to a defended position on the third floor, behind the barricade that Neville had built, where the fighting was heavy but the walls were reinforced and the risk of collapse was minimal. He directed Lupin and Tonks to fight together, always within sight of each other, because he knew they were stronger as a pair, and because separation was what had killed them. Not all of his interventions worked. The battle was chaos. War does not respect plans, even plans informed by 62 years of future knowledge. Some things happened regardless. Some deaths occurred that Draco had not predicted because his knowledge of the first timeline was incomplete. He had not been present for every moment of the original battle, had not seen every fallen body, had not counted every casualty. But most of them worked. Enough of them. The critical ones. The names that mattered most, the losses that had defined the decades after the First War, those losses were prevented. Not all, but enough. Fred Weasley fought on the east side and survived. Colin Creevey held the third floor and survived. Lupin and Tonks fought together and survived. When the battle was over and the sun rose and the living counted the dead, the count was lower than it had been. Lower than any of the survivors knew it should have been, because none of them, except Draco, knew what the alternative looked like. Draco knew, and the knowing was the weight he carried silently, privately, in the place where the 73-year-old lived inside the 14-year-old's body. The weight of two timelines. The weight of comparison, the weight of every name on the memorial wall that was no longer there and every name that remained. He carried the weight, because that was the price, and the price was worth it. There was a moment, after the battle, in the Great Hall. The Weasleys were together, all of them, including Fred. Molly was holding Fred with the fierce, desperate grip of a mother who did not know how close she had come to losing him, but who sensed it, in the way that mothers sense the proximity of disaster, and who was responding with the only tool she possessed. Love, physical, overwhelming, borderline suffocating love, expressed through the act of holding and not letting go. Draco stood in the doorway. Watching, he was not a Weasley, was not family, was not part of the circle of red hair and freckles and the particular Weasley warmth that had been in another timeline, broken by a wall that fell on a boy who was laughing. George saw him. George, who was standing beside Fred, whose arm was around Fred's shoulder, whose face was wet with tears that he was not bothering to hide, because George Weasley had never in his life hidden an emotion and was not about to start now. "Oi," George said. "Malfoy?" Draco looked at him. "Yes?" "Fred says you told him to go east. Before the battle. You specifically told him to fight on the east side." "I did. Why?" Draco looked at Fred. At the face that was George's face. The twin, the mirror, the other half. At the boy who had been dead for 60 years in another timeline and who was alive, right now, in this timeline, because Draco had told him to go east. "Because the east side was safer," Draco said. "How did you know that? I'm a Slytherin, we assess risk." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm prepared to give." George looked at him, then crossed the room, stood in front of Draco, and did something that no Weasley had ever done to a Malfoy in the recorded history of either family. He hugged him. The hug was not gentle. It was the Weasley hug, full-bodied, slightly too tight, the hug of a family that expressed love through physical contact the way other families expressed it through words. Draco stood in George Weasley's arms and felt the warmth and the gratitude and the fierce, unspoken message of a man who did not know that his brother had been dead in another timeline, but who knew, with the intuitive certainty of a twin, that something had been prevented and that the person who prevented it was standing in front of him. "Thank you," George whispered. "I don't know what you did, but thank you." Draco did not speak, could not speak. The 73-year-old inside him was crying, not the controlled, dignified tears of a man who has learned to manage his emotions, but the raw, uncontrolled, devastating tears of a man who has carried a dead friend's memory for 60 years and who has just watched that friend survive. He put his arms around George, held on, and in the great hall, in the aftermath, in the golden morning light that came through the shattered windows and touched the living and the dead with equal warmth, a Malfoy and a Weasley stood together and held each other, and the world, for one small moment, was exactly right. There are things the story has not yet told. The private moments, the 3 a.m. conversations with himself, the experience of living inside a body that does not match the mind it contains. The mirror was the hardest part. Every morning, Draco looked in the mirror and saw a child. Pale, small, 11, 12, 13, 14, growing, yes, aging, yes, but growing at the glacial, interminable pace of human adolescence, which was, for a man who had already lived 73 years, a form of temporal torture. The face changed slowly, the jawline sharpened, the cheekbones emerged. The body lengthened, but the changes were measured in millimeters and months, and the man inside the body experienced them with the particular impatience of someone who has already been through puberty once and who has absolutely no interest in doing it again. The voice was the worst. The breaking voice, the unpredictable, embarrassing, physiologically inevitable process of vocal cords lengthening and thickening and producing, at random and without warning, sounds that range from a child's soprano to a man's baritone, and that occasionally, at the worst possible moments, cracked in a way that made Draco want to obliviate everyone within earshot. "Your voice is changing," Narcissa said, at dinner, during Christmas of 3rd year, with the gentle, amused observation of a mother watching her son grow up. "I am aware, Mother. It's a natural process. I am excruciatingly aware. Your father's voice changed when he was 13 too. He spent a month refusing to speak in public. That explains a great deal about father's communication style." Narcissa smiled. The smile was warm, genuine, and completely unaware that the boy across the table was not experiencing puberty for the first time, but was enduring it for the second, and that the endurance was accompanied by the specific existential indignity of a 73-year-old man whose voice cracked while ordering pumpkin juice at breakfast. The body was foreign. The mind was not, and the gap between the two, the constant grinding friction of an adult consciousness trapped in a developing body, was the background noise of Draco's second life. Present always. Acknowledged rarely. Endured with the particular grim stoicism of a man who has survived a war and who is not going to be defeated by hormones. The emotions were harder than the body. Not the adult emotions, the grief, the guilt, the determination that drove the plan. Those were familiar. Managed, the well-worn tools of a man who had spent decades learning to process complicated feelings. The adolescent emotions were the problem. Because the body produced them, the surges of adrenaline, the flooding of cortisol, the neurochemical storms that accompany adolescent brain development, regardless of the mind's maturity. Draco's 73-year-old consciousness was riding a 13-year-old's endocrine system. And the endocrine system did not care about wisdom or experience or the careful, disciplined, emotional regulation that Draco had spent decades developing. The anger was the most disruptive. Adolescent anger, hot, irrational, chemically produced, ambushed him at moments that his adult mind recognized as trivial but his teenage body experienced as catastrophic. A dropped quill. A wrong answer in class. Malfoy being mentioned in the Prophet in connection with Lucius's arrest. Triggers that the 73-year-old would have processed with a shrug and a cup of tea produced. In the 14-year-old body, volcanic eruptions of fury that took every ounce of occlumency training to contain. You snapped your quill, Hermione observed, during a study session in 4th year. The quill was defective. The quill was fine until you read the Prophet article about your father. I do not wish to discuss my father. I know, but your body is discussing him whether you wish it to or not. Your face is red. Your hands are shaking. Your magical signature is fluctuating. I can feel it from here. You are experiencing a stress response that is biochemically adolescent and emotionally adult, and the combination is clearly overwhelming your regulatory capacity. Hermione, yes? Please stop analysing me. I analyse everything. You knew this when you told me the truth. I told you the truth about the timeline. I did not authorise a psychological evaluation. The psychological evaluation is complementary. It is not complementary. It is intrusive. It is both. Draco looked at her. At the girl who was, in terms of raw intelligence, the most formidable person he had ever encountered in either lifetime. At the girl who would, in another timeline, become the most powerful politician in Wizarding Britain. At the girl who was, right now, at 14, already operating at a level that most adults could not match, and who was using that capacity to analyse Draco's stress response with the clinical precision of a diagnostic spell. You're right, Draco said. The body produces emotions that the mind cannot control. It's like driving a broom that accelerates on its own. You can steer, but you cannot control the speed. Have you considered meditation? I have considered fire whiskey, but the body is 14 and the house elves won't serve me. That's probably for the best. That is definitely for the best. Narcissa was the relationship that Draco treasured most in his second life. Not because the relationship was different. Narcissa was Narcissa in both timelines. The same quiet strength, the same fierce, unconditional love, the same willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect her son, including lying to the face of the most powerful dark wizard in history. But Draco was different, and the difference changed the relationship. Not in its nature, but in its depth. Because Draco, who had spent his first life taking his mother for granted in the way that children take parents for granted, as fixtures, as constants, as permanent features of the landscape that do not require active appreciation, was now experiencing motherhood from the perspective of a man who had already lost her. Narcissa had died in 2041. Quietly, in her sleep. At the age of 86, Draco had been at her bedside, had held her hand, had watched the last breath leave her body with the particular devastating gentleness of a death that is peaceful and that is, for that reason, no less terrible than a violent one. He had mourned her for 32 years, had carried her absence the way you carry a phantom limb, present in its vacancy, aching in its emptiness. And now, she was here. Alive, 41 years old, blonde, and beautiful, and afraid as she had always been afraid, and brave as she had always been brave, and completely unaware that the boy sitting across from her at the breakfast table was a man who had already buried her, and who was experiencing, with every meal and every conversation, and every casual touch of her hand on his shoulder, the staggering, overwhelming, nearly unbearable gift of her continued presence. You look at me differently, Narcissa said one evening during the summer before 5th year. They were in the garden at the manor. Lucius was in Azkaban. The house was quieter without him. Not better, not worse, just quieter. The particular quiet of a house that has lost its loudest voice. Do I? You look at me the way people look at things they're afraid of losing. Draco's chest tightened, because his mother, who was not a Legilimens, and who did not possess Hermione's analytical intellect, had nevertheless perceived the truth through the method that mothers have employed since the beginning of time, watching. "I don't want to lose you," Draco said. "You won't. I'm right here. I know, but right here is temporary. Everything is temporary." Narcissa looked at her son, at the boy who spoke like an old man, who carried himself with a gravity that was too heavy for his years, who looked at her across the breakfast table with eyes that contained something she could not name but that she recognized, because she had seen the same thing in the eyes of people at funerals. The look of someone who understands the weight of what they still have because they have already measured the weight of what they will lose. "You are 14, Narcissa said. "You should not be thinking about losing people. I can't help it." "Then, think about this instead. I am here. I am not going anywhere. And whatever is happening, whatever you are carrying that makes you look at me the way you do not have to carry it alone. I'm not alone. Good, because Malfoys do not carry things alone. That is not our way. Our way is to have house elves carry things for us. Our way is to have family. House elves are a bonus." She touched his hair. The gesture of a mother, the gesture that communicated, in the language of Narcissa Malfoy, everything that the Malfoy vocabulary did not contain. "I love you. I see you. I do not understand you, but I do not need to understand you in order to love you." Draco closed his eyes, let the touch settle over him, and the 73-year-old inside him, the man who had buried his mother and mourned her for 3 decades, received the touch like a benediction. A second chance. Not at heroism, not at redemption, not at the grand dramatic project of saving the world. A second chance at breakfast with his mother. That was the real gift. The one he had not expected. The one that no amount of strategic planning could have predicted or produced. The war could be won through preparation. The Horcruxes could be destroyed through knowledge. The deaths could be prevented through intervention. But breakfast with his mother could not be manufactured. It could only be experienced. And the experiencing of it, the daily, ordinary, unremarkable act of sitting across from a woman who loved him and eating eggs and drinking tea and arguing about nothing, was the thing that made the second life worthwhile. Not the heroism. Not the saved lives. Not the shorter memorial wall. Breakfast with his mother. In a garden. In the summer. That was enough. That had always been enough. He just hadn't known it the first time. The potions classroom. 5th year. A moment nobody witnessed. Snape kept Draco after class. Closed the door. Cast a silencing charm. "I have been observing you," Snape said, "for 5 years. I know. You know a great deal. More than any student I have ever taught. More than most adults I have encountered. Your knowledge of potions exceeds the Nuke curriculum. Your understanding of dark arts theory is postgraduate level. Your occlumency shields are, Mr. Malfoy, your occlumency shields are the strongest I have ever encountered, including my own. Thank you." That was not a compliment. It was an observation, and the observation leads to a question that I have been formulating for 5 years and that I am now prepared to ask. Ask, what are you? Draco looked at Snape, at the man who had been his head of house, his mentor, his protector, at the man who had killed Dumbledore and died in a shack, and whose love story had been the most tragic in wizarding history, at the man who was, right now, in this moment, alive and suspicious, and asking the exact right question. "I'm a student," Draco said. "You are not a student. You are wearing a student. The person inside the student is someone else. I'm Draco Malfoy. You are a Draco Malfoy. Whether you are the Draco Malfoy who was born in this timeline is a question I cannot answer, but that I increasingly suspect I should." Draco considered his options. He had told Dumbledore. He had told Hermione. He had told Ron and Harry. Snape was the last significant person in his inner circle who did not know the truth. And Snape was the person best positioned to understand it, because Snape understood sacrifice, understood the weight of knowledge, understood what it meant to carry a secret for years, decades, a lifetime, while the world misunderstood you and the people you loved could not be told. I died, Draco said, at 73. I woke up at 11, with everything. Snape was very still. The dungeon was very quiet. Everything, every memory, every skill, every piece of knowledge I accumulated over 73 years, including knowledge about me, including knowledge about you. What do you know about me? I know about Lily. I know about the Patronus. I know about the unbreakable vow with my mother. I know about the night on the tower. I know about the shack. The shack? The place where you die. In my timeline. In the shrieking shack, Nagini. On Voldemort's orders. You bled out on the floor and gave Harry your memories, and your last words were, "Look at me," because you wanted to see Lily's eyes one more time. Snape's face, the mask, the impenetrable, carefully constructed mask that had fooled Voldemort and Dumbledore and the entire wizarding world for 20 years, cracked, not a large crack. A hairline, a single thin fracture that ran from his jaw to his temple and that let through, for one fraction of a second, the full scope of the emotion behind it. I die, Snape said. You died. Past tense. In a timeline that no longer exists. Because of you. Because of choices I have made. Choices that have already changed the trajectory. The diary is destroyed. The ring is destroyed. Sirius is free. The future is different. And in this different future, do I survive? If I have anything to say about it. You have a great deal to say about a great many things, Miss Malfoy. I have had 73 years to develop opinions. Snape looked at him. The crack in the mask sealed. The face reassembled. But behind the face, in the space where the real Snape lived, the man who loved a dead woman's memory and who was preparing to sacrifice everything for her son, something shifted. You told me about the shack, Snape said. About my death. You told me the details. Yes, to save me. To give you the information you need to avoid it. And in return? Nothing. I don't want anything in return. That is not how Slytherins operate. It is how I operate. I have spent 73 years learning the difference between strategy and generosity. Strategy is transactional. Generosity is not. I am telling you how you die because you deserve to live. There is no transaction. Snape was quiet for a very long time. The dungeon was cold. The candles flickered. I have spent 20 years, Snape said, believing that the only person who has ever shown me genuine kindness was Lily Evans. I am now confronted with the possibility that a Malfoy, has done something kind without expecting anything in return. The world is full of surprises. The world is full of disappointments. Surprises are considerably rarer. Then consider this a surprise. I will consider it a data point. A single data point does not constitute a trend. Then I will provide additional data points. Over time. Consistently, that sounds suspiciously like friendship. It sounds exactly like friendship, Professor. Snape looked at Draco. Looked at the 15-year-old face that contained a 73-year-old mind, and did something that no student had ever seen, and that no colleague had ever witnessed, and that only one person in the world, a woman with red hair and green eyes, dead for 14 years, would have recognized. He almost smiled. Saturdays, Snape said. Tea, my office. 4 o'clock. I accept. You are not permitted to be late. I am never late. You were late to my class in second year. That was because Peeves dropped a water balloon on me in the corridor. Excuses are for Hufflepuffs. That is the most Snape thing you have ever said. I am not aware of a standard for Snape things. I have 73 years of data. Trust me, that was peak Snape. The almost smile twitched, the mask reassembled. But the relationship, the real one, the one that lived beneath the performance, had been established. Not mentor and student, not head of house and charge. Something else. Something that existed in the space between the person Snape had been in Draco's first life and the person Draco was determined to help him become in the second. An ally. A friend. A person whose life was worth saving, not because of what they could provide, but because of who they were. Draco went to tea on Saturday. And the Saturday after that. And every Saturday for the rest of his time at Hogwarts. And then every Saturday after graduation. And then every Saturday for 60 years until Snape, who lived in this timeline to the age of 91, which was 50, 3 years longer than he had lived the first time, died in his sleep in his rooms at Hogwarts, which had been his home since 1981 and which he had never left because leaving would have meant admitting that the castle was more than a workplace and that the people in it were more than colleagues. Snape died on a Thursday, not a Tuesday. Draco considered this a personal victory. The tea was always terrible. That was also a fixed point. One final story. The one that no one knew. The one Draco carried alone. The night before the Battle of Hogwarts. The night before everything. Draco stood in the room of requirement. Alone, the room had configured itself as an empty space. 4 walls, a floor, a ceiling, nothing else. The room of a man who needs space to think. He stood in the empty room and thought about the first time. The first battle. The first war. The boy he had been, 16, terrified, marked, trapped between a dark lord who demanded murder and a headmaster who demanded sacrifice and a family who demanded loyalty and a conscience that demanded, for the first time in his life, something better. He had been pathetic. He knew this, had known it for 60 years. The crying in the bathroom, the broken vanishing cabinet, the poisoned mead, the cursed necklace, the clumsy, desperate, hopelessly inadequate attempts of a boy who had been given a mission he could not complete and who was slowly, publicly, devastatingly falling apart. He had been pathetic. And now he was standing in the same room, in the same castle, on the eve of the same battle, and he was not pathetic. He was prepared. He was informed. He was a 73-year-old master strategist who had spent 4 years dismantling Voldemort's immortality and positioning the chessboard for a checkmate that the Dark Lord could not see coming. He was ready. But the boy, the first Draco, the one who had been pathetic and terrified and 16, that boy was still inside him. Still crying in the bathroom, still breaking the cabinet, still standing on the tower with his wand pointed at Dumbledore and his hand shaking. That boy had never left. Would never leave. Because the second life was not a replacement for the first. It was an addition. The memories were additive. The weight was cumulative. And the boy who had been pathetic and terrified was as much a part of Draco Malfoy as the man who was prepared and informed and ready. Draco stood in the room of requirement and allowed himself, for the first and only time in his second life, to cry for the boy he had been. Not the man, not the 73-year-old who had died in a chair, the boy. The 16-year-old who had been given the mark and the mission and who had not known how to refuse. The boy who had stood in a bathroom and cried, and who had been seen by nobody except moaning Myrtle, whose sympathy was limited by the fact that she was dead, and that her understanding of living problems was approximately as useful as a chocolate teapot. Draco cried for that boy, for his fear and his failure and his pathetic, inadequate, heartbreakingly human response to an impossible situation. And then he stopped, wiped his face, straightened his robes, and walked out of the room of requirement to fight the war. Not for the first time, not for the last time, but for the right time. The time when he was ready. The morning after the battle, Draco stood in the great hall and looked at the memorial wall. The names were carved in stone. The dead. The fallen. The people who had given their lives so that the living could continue. The wall was shorter than it had been in his first life. Significantly shorter. Names that should have been there, that had been carved in stone that Draco had visited every year for 60 years, were missing. Fred Weasley, missing from the wall. Alive, Colin Creevey, missing from the wall. Alive, Remus Lupin, missing from the wall. Alive, Nymphadora Tonks, missing from the wall. Alive, not all of them. The wall was not empty. War is war. People die. The math of combat does not negotiate, does not make exceptions, does not care that a man from the future has spent 4 years trying to reduce the casualties. But the wall was shorter, and the names that were missing, the names that Draco had carried for 60 years, the names that had been the furniture of his guilt, the constant daily reminder of every person he had failed to save in his first life, those names were gone. Replaced by nothing, by the absence of carved stone, by the blank, clean, gloriously empty space where a name should have been and was not. Draco touched the wall, ran his fingers across the stone, felt the names that were there and the spaces that were not, and the difference between the two, which was the difference between his first life and his second. The difference was measured in names, in people, in the warm, breathing, laughing, crying, impossibly alive human beings who were walking around the castle right now, eating breakfast, hugging their families, existing in a world that had tried to kill them and that had, thanks to the intervention of a man who should not exist, failed. Draco pressed his forehead against the wall, closed his eyes. I did what I could, he thought. It wasn't everything. It wasn't enough. But it was something. And something is the difference between the wall I remember and the wall I'm touching. He opened his eyes, stepped back, looked at the wall one last time. Then he turned and walked into the great hall, where the living were eating breakfast and the sun was coming through the windows, and the world, the imperfect, damaged, beautiful, salvaged world, was continuing. As it always did. As it always would. There is one more thread. The thread that connects the first death to the second. The thread that answers the question the story has been asking since the beginning. Was it worth it? Draco thought about this question often. In the quiet moments. In the gaps between the strategic planning and the Horcrux destruction, and the careful, patient, exhausting work of changing the future one conversation at a time. Was it worth it? The second life. The 73 years of accumulated knowledge deployed inside an 11-year-old body. The loneliness of being the only person who remembered a world that no longer existed. The weight of carrying 2 timelines. The one that happened and the one that was happening, simultaneously, permanently, without the possibility of setting either one down. The answer was not simple. Simple answers were for people who had not lived 2 lives. The weight was real. The loneliness was real. The experience of sitting in a classroom full of children and knowing with absolute, terrible, unshakable certainty which of them would live and which would die and which would fight and which would run and which would betray and which would sacrifice everything. That knowledge was a burden that no person should carry, and that Draco carried every day. He looked at Lavender Brown in 3rd year and saw a girl who would, in another timeline, be savaged by Fenrir Greyback. He looked at her and saw the scars that she did not yet have, and the trauma that she did not yet carry, and the years of recovery that she would not need. in this timeline, because the battle would be shorter and Greyback would be captured before he reached the castle. He looked at Cedric Diggory in 4th year and saw a boy who would die in a graveyard. Kill the spare. Those had been the words. He heard them every time he saw Cedric's face, the handsome, kind, completely unaware face of a boy who did not know that in another version of events he was already dead. Cedric lived. In this timeline. Because the Portkey was intercepted. Because Draco's intelligence had been acted upon. Because the graveyard ambush had been prepared. Cedric Diggory graduated from Hogwarts and became a healer and married a woman named Cho Chang and had 2 children and lived a full, ordinary, completely unremarkable life that was, for Draco, the most remarkable thing in the world. Because unremarkable lives are the lives that wars prevent, and every unremarkable life that continues, every breakfast eaten, every child born, every completely ordinary Tuesday that unfolds without violence or loss, is a victory. Not a dramatic victory. Not the kind that gets carved on memorial walls. The quiet kind. The kind that exists in the space where a name should have been carved and was not. Draco carried the weight, but the weight was balanced by the names, by the missing names, by the lives that continued because a man who should not exist had spent 4 years making sure they could. Was it worth it? Draco stood in his garden in Wiltshire. He was 60. Astoria was gone. Scorpius was grown. The war was 30 years in the past. The world had moved on. The memorial wall at Hogwarts was visited by tourists now, people who had not been born during the war and who regarded it the way you regard historical monuments, with respect but without personal connection. The garden was quiet. The evening light was golden. A cup of tea sat on the table beside his chair. The same chair. A different chair. Every chair he had ever sat in felt like the chair in which he had died, and the association was not morbid but was present. A reminder that all chairs are temporary, and that the person sitting in them is not the chair. He thought about the first life, about the boy who had taken the mark at 16 and who had spent 60 years carrying the guilt, about the man who had died in this chair, not this specific chair, but this type of chair, this quality of chair, the chair of a man who has stopped moving and who is sitting and who is, for the first time in a very long time, still, that man's last thought had been, I should have done better. This man's last thought, when it came, which would not be for another 31 years, because Draco Malfoy's second life was longer than his first, would be different. Not because the second life was perfect. It was not. Astoria had still died. The blood curse had still taken her. Some things were fixed points, and Draco had learned, through the most painful possible experience, that not even 73 years of future knowledge could change every outcome. But the last thought would be different, because the life had been different. Not in the dramatic, obvious ways, not in the Horcruxes and the battles and the strategic interventions that had shortened the war and saved lives. In the small ways, the ordinary ways, the ways that no one would ever write about or remember or carve on a wall. The breakfast with Narcissa, the chess with Ron, the study sessions with Hermione, the tea with Snape on Saturdays, the quiet, unremarkable, completely ordinary friendship with Harry Potter, the friendship that had started on a train when a boy said, "Is there room?" and another boy said, "Yeah, come in." These were the things that made the second life worth living. Not the heroism, the humanity, the act of being a person among people, of choosing kindness when cruelty was available, of sitting in a garden with a cup of tea and feeling, for the first time in 164 combined years, that the person sitting in the chair was someone he could live with. Not a hero, not a villain, not a strategic genius or a reborn prodigy or the man who single-handedly changed the course of wizarding history. Just a person who had been given a second chance, and who had used it imperfectly, inadequately, humanly to be better. Was it worth it? Ask Fred Weasley, who is alive. Ask Cedric Diggory, who is alive. Ask Sirius Black, who is free. Ask Severus Snape, who died in his sleep at 91 instead of on a floor at 38. Ask Narcissa Malfoy, who never had to lie to a Dark Lord about whether a boy was dead because the boy was never in the forest in the way he had been in the forest before. Ask Remus Lupin, who watched his son grow up. Ask Nymphadora Tonks, who watched her son grow up beside Remus. Ask George Weasley, who never had to learn what it felt like to be a twin without a twin. Ask any of them. Ask all of them. Ask the people who are alive because a man who died in a chair decided, in the space between death and rebirth, that the correct response to a life of regret was not acceptance, but action. The answer is always the same. Yes, it was worth it. It was always worth it. And in a garden in Wiltshire, 91 years old, Draco Malfoy sat in a chair with a book in his lap and a cup of tea that had gone cold, and the evening light coming through the window, golden and warm. His last thought was not regret. His last thought was, I did what I could. It was enough. And the dark came. And the dark was warm. And the story ended the way all stories end. Not with a conclusion, but with a continuation. Because the people Draco saved went on living. And the lives they lived were the epilogue. And the epilogue was not a chapter, but a world. A world with fewer names on the wall. A world where Fred Weasley told jokes and Cedric Diggory healed the sick and Sirius Black laughed in a house he had learned to love. A world where the morning came and the tea was brewed. And the people who should have been dead were alive, and the people who were alive did not know. Could not know that their lives were a gift given by a man who had already lived his own. The world continued, as it always does, as it always will. And somewhere, in the great and mysterious and completely unexplained mechanism that had sent Draco Malfoy back to the beginning, something that was not quite a voice, and was not quite a thought, and was not quite a judgment, but was all three said, well done.